Train by day, Joe Rogan podcast by night, all day.
So I have questions for you.
Please.
And it's regarding Anderson Silva. I want to know what you think is coming next. Is he gonna? Are you on the inside of that? Is it what's happening?
I can give you a scoop. Most likely, it'll be one of two things depending on what they can talk him into. And Anderson is in a very rare position where he sort of gets to choose his opponents for the most part. It'll be either, based on, like, he didn't want to fight Chael Sonnen because he talked so much shit. He didn't want to do it. But he also did because he wanted to silence him. So they just had to financially motivate him. It will most likely be either this kid, Chris Weidman, who's the best up-and-coming 185-pounder, or one of the best. He hasn't fought a lot of guys, but he's
I think I've heard about
outstanding.
him. He's pretty solid dude.
Just destroyed Mark Munoz, who's also a top 10 contender. And the way he did it was just so complete and total. The way he anticipated all of his moves, countered them, almost strangled them 3 or 4 times in the first round.
He's a pretty young kid, right?
Yeah, and a spectacular wrestler. So it's him. He might get it, but he's a bit of a tough sell because there's a lot of folks in the mainstream that don't know who he is. He's more of someone who he can beat Anderson Silva. I mean, look, who the fuck knows what's going to actually happen, but it may be possible that he could pull it off. He has the right set of skills, but he's not known as well. But the other option is if George St. Pierre beats Carlos Condit. Okay. Then they have some fucking crazy super fight.
Is that the guy that they mentioned at the end of the fight?
And the end of which fight?
Pierre, when they were saying, so are you gonna fight him? And he went, nah, I don't want to fight him.
Oh, no, that's John Jones.
Okay, Jones, right.
Yeah, he said he doesn't want to fight John Jones, but John Jones really is in a totally different weight class. Not just, Anderson has dabbled in the 205-pound weight class, but really he makes 185 pretty easily. He doesn't have a problem making 185. And John Jones could never make 185. John Jones is 6'3", 240 pounds, 230 at least when he's walking around, and then he cuts down to 205 slowly, over his camp. Loses the last, probably 10 pounds in water weight. He's just a way bigger guy. He's way bigger, and he's a really strong wrestler. And stylistically, he's a nightmare. And apparently, they have a mutual admiration for each other. That's it can be bypassed, with the right amount of money, and both guys would probably agree to it if the right amount of money was on the table. But right now, they've both stated their admiration for each other, and they're probably number 1 and number 2 pound-for-pound fighters in the world right now. People would like to see that, but honestly, I think George St. Pierre and Anderson are more physically the same size. It's closer. Okay. George has a struggle to make 170, whereas Anderson is he makes 185 pretty easy. George can make 185 and be basically the same size, and that would be an amazing fight. Yeah. That, I think, if George can get through Carlos Condit, and I believe they're going to fight in the fall, depending on George's recovering from ACL surgery. Okay. So, yeah, I've had 2. And if George gets through that and everything's cool, and if he beats Carlos Condit, which is an if, Carlos is really good. He's very tough, but if he beats him, then they go to probably Dallas Stadium. They'll probably do it in that big, giant, fucking 60,000 square foot.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, that'd be incredible.
I'm just looking forward to the next. I'm looking to see what happens next because that was a pretty amazing.
Yeah, Anderson's he's a ninja. I mean, he really is. He's a real master martial artist in a way that, like, what he does, there's maybe a tiny handful of human beings on the planet who can move the way he moves.
Right, and so I think going back to some of that, that relaxed state we were talking about before, it's really watching him operate. It is like Jordan at his top of his game. It's just this panther, this art, this ballet movement, just fluid, and connected.
Well, what Anderson is so much better than everyone else that you get to see that art. Whereas, like, you see a couple of dudes that are really close to each other go at it. They don't have that giant skill level above their opponent, whereas Anderson does. Like, when it comes to striking, Anderson's the most accurate fighter we've ever had inside the octagon. Like, no one has been as accurate with him, and he's so fluid in the way he moves. He does things, and his opponents don't even realize he's done them until they land, and you're like, what? He's like the master of like sneaking shit in. Mm-hmm. It's a really unusual dude, and the reason why he's able to do that is, you know, mixed martial arts as a whole has really only been around since 1993, and we're seeing this constant evolution of it. But Anderson represents right now what's possible, the furthest evolution of the game as far as it's ever gone. But the reality is, in his individual disciplines, he's not as good as the best guys. There are better kickboxers than him. There are better jiu-jitsu guys than him. And it's like, one day, we're going to see a guy who can do to Anderson Silva what Anderson Silva can do to Chael Sonnen. I mean, we haven't seen it yet, but we're going to see a guy who has Rickson Gracie jiu-jitsu and Badr Hari type striking. Right. You know, and when that happens, I mean, man, and it's inevitable. It's the sport is moving in that direction. It's like this constantly accelerating process, and right now, it's the only people that are successful are the completely fanatical and obsessed. You can't get by on sheer athleticism. Like, you see some basketball players that they probably don't work out as hard as they could, and you know, they maybe don't, but they're good enough to get by, and they have enough gifts to get by in the pro.
Basketball players, tall and arrogant.
When you get to the top, the upper echelons of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, there's no room for anybody but the fanatical. There's no room for anybody but the obsessed. And the Rory McDonalds of the world, these like young guys that are coming up that are just insanely good, and every time you see them, they're much better than they were 6 months ago. That's the future, and that's
inspiring. Just because it's definitely that chess game that we spoke of earlier. I feel like it's more interesting to watch because, although I don't have necessarily the frame of reference for what's actually happening, when you actually go back and look at the tape and go click by click, you go, oh my God. That guy, exactly what you're talking about. John in your corner just going this and then this and then this. It's chess moves, and it's millimeters.
And with a guy like Anderson, there's no one to tell him to do that because he's that guy. You know, Anderson really doesn't have it. I mean, he has guys that coach him in Muay Thai and coach him in Jiu-Jitsu. When it comes to MMA, nobody's going to tell Anderson what to do. He knows exactly what to do. He's at the top of the mountain.